And we are live. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining for this meetup on DevSecOps on Kubernetes. My name is Christoph, and I give this another few minutes before we actually start. If you already joined, then feel free to say hi. Use the chat to do so. You might also want to include where you're from. I think we'll have, again, a very international crowd today. If you say hi in the chat, please make sure to select to everyone before saying hi, because otherwise only the panelists can see your message. Yeah, very good. Jeroen, hi from the border of the Dutch province of Gelderland and Utrecht. Nice. Hello world. Very good. Yeah, Pamir, thanks. You already found the Q&A section. That's also great. If you have questions during the presentation, then feel free to use the Q&A to store them. I give this a few more minutes to allow people to join. There's still people coming in. Hi to Peru, United Kingdom, Spain, Dublin, Berlin, Finland. Nice, very, very international group. Thank you all for joining. As I said, I'll give this another 1 or 2 minutes and then we'll get started. This is a bit of a new thing for me. And the reason is that Thomas Fricke figured out, I think, 2 days ago or something like that, that he needs to be in Brussels. So I guess personal travel has started again. So he said, Christoph, here's what we do. I will record my talk and then I will dial in and listen and be available for the Q&A. So that's what we'll go to do tonight or today, depending on from where you are dialing in. We'll see Thomas' presentation, which he recorded, and then he will join hopefully halfway through the recording and then be available to answer questions in the end. That's traveling starting again, but I'm sure we'll make this work. So maybe a few housekeeping rules. This meeting is being recorded, and we are happy to provide a recording for you tomorrow via email, together with some useful links. Thomas always has some really great examples, which we'll make sure to link. And if you have questions during the presentation, then just feel free to use either the chat, which many of you already found, or the Q&A section to ask your questions. And then I'll make sure that Thomas gets to answer these questions in the Q&A at the end. So I wait for, let's say, 1 more minute, and then we'll get started. I already see a good first question there. Do we require developer background for DevSecOps? I don't think so. I think it's whoever you are, it's interesting to understand, and whatever your training is, it's interesting to understand the basic concepts. Thomas is a very technical guy, so he'll show a lot of technical examples, but I think he's also great in explaining the concepts behind it, so it should be useful for many different roles. Cool, so I think 5 minutes in, time to get started. Let me say hi and welcome again. I'm Christoph. I'm hosting this webinar tonight, this meetup tonight. It's the second time we have the pleasure to have Thomas with us. As I said, he won't be here in person until probably halfway through his presentation, which he pre-recorded. Reason is that he had to go to Brussels on short notice, but he really wanted to make this meetup happen, so he recorded his presentation. So what we'll do is I'll play the presentation, and then halfway through he'll join, and then Thomas will be available to answer any questions that you might have. If you have questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat or in the Q&A section, and I'll make sure that Thomas can answer them in the end. As I said, this meeting is being recorded, and we'll share a recording tomorrow with all of you together with some useful links. And with that, let me just start the recording and Thomas talk.
Welcome again to DevSecOps and Kubernetes, and thank you for inviting me again to this Humanitech webinar. My name is Thomas Fricke, and I'm normally working in Kubernetes security. So my topic is Kubernetes security. Let's see how we can get through this webinar. That's me. Founded another company now. Formerly I founded Endocode. I'm doing sister automation for a while, DevOps for at least a decade, cloud database and software architect and so on. I have some pro bono memberships. I worked with Octarine before they have been bought by VMware on the technical advisory board. Currently I'm founding Resility, which is a cloud security company, and I'm working on how to fund open source security. The paper will appear in the next days or weeks, I think. So what's our agenda for today? I'm mostly focused on networks. Let's recap the architecture. And then on service mesh, this means we are using Istio as an example, but this could also apply to other service meshes. Security in general, I cannot talk about anything today, but have in mind we have an architecture, we have users and service accounts, certain roles, port security policies and so on, but we will cover only a small number of checks. It's about scripting, how you get rid of the auto-mount service account token, things like this, how to detect privileged containers and so on. So yeah, let's start with a command everybody can execute. Here you see a command looking for security context. So you can go through all the pods in all namespaces. This is what this script does, and uses a Go template to show the name of the namespace, the name of the pod, and the security context. And here you see some of them have privileges. For example, you have a capability edit, net bind service, and anything else is dropped. But you might also have this several times. So net bind service is only necessary if you want to use privileged ports, and then you have probably a privileged service. And if you look here, this is a core DNS service running in this local Minikube installation. Another candidate is always Nginx ingress controller, for example. This is completely unnecessary, but because you can configure it that it is using no privileged port. But here we have an example where the privileges have been used to get the ingress controller up and running. Another example is how to chase insecurities with one-liners. So you should have an overview about your service account, and then you are looking for how to mount service account to. This is normally not set by default, and this is true by default, which is a major fail in the architecture. But here you can use it, and everything should result in a false if you use service accounts in your own namespaces. And in this, the row at the end, you can see if a pod overrides it, so you can test it with, let's say, in some dozen or a few low hundreds of these kind of scripts if your Kubernetes cluster is well configured. This does not cover the underlying layers of, let's say, namespaces or privileges, or what SysTick, Aqua Security, and Snike are doing to check if you have privileges in your, or if some events are happening in your cluster, which could be a security violation. No, it's checking the security of Kubernetes as an orchestrator on itself. So a little bit more complicated is if you get an overview about the network layers. This is an example of GKE, so the Google Kubernetes engine. And what you see is we have pods, we have daemon sets, so the normal workloads. They're connected to secrets and certificates, and they are used for custom controllers, for example, to expose transport layer security-based services. Services are exposed through this custom controller in the cloud, which is outside Kubernetes, but it is used to give you a load balancer service out of the box directly in the cloud. It also applies ingress and egress rules. You might activate network policies, which is something like Calico, Weave, or you might even implement Istio. So these are the layers you can control in Kubernetes. You can also change the ingress implementation to Nginx, and then you have an Nginx ingress running in GKE, which sometimes makes sense. So the light blue row is how it is connected. So the containers are started by the GKE worker nodes. Container network interface CNI is hidden from you normally, and you get not access to it unless you use privileged ports. You might even implement traffic rules, IP tables, BGP. This is done behind the scenes. And as a bonus, in Google Cloud, you get network endpoint groups, NEG, which directly redirect the traffic from a global or regional load balancer into your pod, circumventing the internal Linux network system. And this makes an unbeatable performance in this case. And then you are easily going to configure a global or regional load balancer. Implementation is maglev, and with this implementation you get traffic directly in your pod. So I announced that we will look deeper into service mesh. And service mesh are normally announced as trust nothing, which actually means you don't trust your network, which is a little bit weird. If you are in a cloud provider's network, you should definitely trust it, because this is the job of the cloud provider. But it might be that you are using a private cloud, or a mix of private public cloud, or you connect clouds or Kubernetes clusters in different regions. Then it might be a good idea to use a service mesh to connect this. What's a service mesh? Let's go back to the first design pattern paper of Brandon Burns and David Oppenheimer. It is a pattern for container-based distributed systems. So it's a sidecar pattern normally we use, and this means you are running a pod with a sidecar. And what is not mentioned in the original paper, but which is very clear, the sidecar could also be used to redirect the entire network through a VPN, or proxy it, or change the rules for the entire pod, not only for log saving, but for real things like networks. This means Just remember what a container is. A container mainly is a file system, a layered file system, and some processes running in Linux namespaces. And here the sidecar and the payload container share the same network and UTS namespaces. So network namespace is network devices, stacks, port, IP tables, rules, routes, anything like that. The UTS is mostly hostname and network information service. So today we name this DNS, and this means we have a namespace for the network, and this can be used to control the entire container network traffic. Just remember, this is a typical implementation using the Linux namespace. All the other namespaces are also present, but they are not interesting in this case, and they normally are isolated and have an individual setting for each container. What does Istio? Istio is a one-click solution in the cloud, so you can simply implement it in GKE. It is, as I already mentioned, used for mixed clouds, so on-premises is connected to the cloud. It's heavily used for native and serverless, even this is not necessary. It is by default usable in OpenShift 4, so it is using CNI, the Container Network Interface is important. It is developed mainly by Google, IBM, Red Hat, so you have big names, impressive architecture, and it should be secure. But let's have a deeper look on that. We use Istio, we are secure now. What you see here is the entire buzzword bingo payload, so secure by default, defense in depth, zero trust, identity policy, centralized encryption, endpoints communication platform, and so on. And this is all mapped into the Istio sidecar, and it's controlling the perimeter, so the ingress and egress traffic of your pod by a sidecar. Question is this a good idea? What shall we think about this? And let's go deeper into the details. What is a sidecar? As I already mentioned, we have a sidecar in every Istio pod, and the sidecar here is nothing than an Istio envoy proxy, which means the entire traffic is proxied through the envoy. So this means Istio has to change the network rules, and every traffic inside the cluster is redirected through the Istio envoy proxy. And this means all your traffic from one application container to or from the network is going through the Istio envoy proxy. And this means you control the traffic completely by the envoy traffic. The price for that is hidden, so you have the Istio init pod, which is normally not talked about, and this pod needs to change the network rules, so it has to be it has to have the net admin capability. This is terminating quick and going away soon, so we have definitely something where we can where we have privileges here running in your pod, even if it's hidden in an init container. Anything else is connected to the Kubernetes API, the galley, the pilot, and the telemetry access. Now everything is merged into an IstioD. You have with Citadel a PKI, and that's how you are managing the certificates here. And this is done through this approach. So we have a centralized castle-like approach where you control everything, and in every pod you add two containers. One is running permanently, the Istio Envoy container, and one is changing the network rules according to that. What does this mean in practical things? In practical things, you want to create a service mesh. This means you control every traffic from and to every pod in this service mesh. This is a result of zero trust. You don't trust anything. So therefore you have to isolate every pod from every other pod and permit only the connections you want to permit. Let's go deeper. This is the pod definition of what comes out of an Istio pod. The version does not matter, so I called it the escape pod because what you definitely can do is you can clear these rules from another pod, which is also privileged. Here you see we use a simply busybox pod for sleep as an example. It does not matter, so we should use it just to have something running. And then at the first step, we echo the old IP table safe rules, and then we use the cleared rules. And yeah, we completely clear them, and then look what is showing up here. So effectively, we are clearing from inside the pod the restrictions from outside. So we have a managed security box which can remove the logs automatically from the inside. So you have to look for the security context here. I have shown you how to check security contexts by a script. Capabilities which are added are netadmin and privileges. So this means we definitely have to check if some pod is doing this or not. So before we go into the details or in the history, just make the presentation.
This seems to be where the video ends. Thomas. Hey, Thomas. Nice having you here. I think you need to unmute.
Okay.
I think you ended the video here.
Okay,
which was probably not on purpose. So
yeah.
Maybe you wanna add the missing parts in person.
Yes. Unfortunately, I only have a mobile phone here. So, but effectively, the session is recorded on my GitHub repository. So you find the notebook with the Istio hack, and this means at this site I only can cite what I've done. So here you see you can take over Istio and hack, and this means you actually can remove the egress rules. This is the example from inside a privileged pod. And the pod is privileged because Istio needed, so the admission controller, it is a changing admission controller. This means it adds privileges to the entire pod. And if one of the containers has privileges, all the other containers have the privileges too. So this means if you have more or less like a submarine pod inside this deployment, it can come through an Helm chart or anything else. Then you have the problem that definitely the pod can remove the Istio rules you have applied from the outside. This means that actually, the Istio security can be removed from inside a pod, which is not intended to be done so. But this is a default installation of Istio you see everywhere. So you see it in GKE. I've not checked it for a while, but I assume that they did not fix it. And the result is what you have to do is you have to insist that in your system, if you want this kind of security, you must install Istio using the CNI module. So CNI is the container network interface, and this is not user space. This is effectively outside the control of a namespace and a user, and this means by that way you can use Istio in a secure way. Unfortunately, this is not the default. So this is a typical thing in Kubernetes. The default is, sorry, I'm on the airport in Brussels.
Oh, good. Let's just wait. Let's just wait for a few seconds. It's okay.
Yeah.
Priority customers may carry one cabin bag and one small bag on board. Non-priority customers are only permitted to carry one small bag on board with one airport duty-free bag. Additional bags will be tagged and carried in your aircraft hold for a fee. Please remove all valuables, medical supplies, personal electronic devices, and spare lithium batteries from all the bags being loaded in the aircraft hold. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so sorry for that. I have traveled to a customer in Brussels this week, and therefore I'm only able to attend from the airport. This means that the default security in Kubernetes is quite low, so you have to care on your own. And the other thing, which is also a problem, that the Kubernetes
FR2931 to Lisbon is now ready for priority boarding at gate 834. Take a moment to note your allocated seat number. Please board the aircraft using the front of your door as indicated on your boarding pass. Also note, bags must be placed under the seat.
Okay. Yeah, so the default security is quite low. And this means you as a Kubernetes cluster user you have to care about the improvement of the security. And this is a bigger pain than you might think, because most security people are unaware of that, and you might even
Please have your COVID test or vaccination ready for inspection. Thank you. We sure that is right.
Yeah, and this means it's a load which the burden is upon you as a Kubernetes cluster user. And this is normally what I would say is the task of the distribution or the cloud vendors, because they take a lot of money for what they're delivering. And I found in all these solutions a lot of security flaws. And this means you have to take into account that you need a security audit, which is the number of auditors is limited, but you have to check it, use at least Kubebench, use different things, and do security edit by your own on that. You can prevent this kind of attacks by not using Istio. If not necessary, you can use network policies. You have a lot of possibilities inside Kubernetes, and this is all in the GitHub repository, where you can simply look to it. If you understand it, it's fine. If not, you can contact me and just ask for support on that.
Yeah, we'll share that link in the follow-up email. It's really interesting to see that you cannot just go ahead and trust the large providers that they will deliver a secure solution, but have to check yourself. And that's, I think, one of your main messages, right? Don't rely on security out of the box.
Yes, and it's quite, it's not hard to implement it, but it is a lot of tasks, and you should not forget anything. And the message is actually, if you have an unsecure application like this Node.js application with image magic, so it's known as the image tragic bug, then you need to do one other mistake and just copying from the Elasticsearch web page, and then you can take over the entire cluster from inside an application. So you can own the cluster by an insecure Node.js application, and then you need one additional flaw, and then it's done. So this is, and if you prevent it, then the attacker must be much more sophisticated.
Understood. Cool. Let's open this up for questions, if okay for you, Thomas.
Yes.
I think those were the main messages you wanted to present today. We have one first question from Peter, which is regarding Istio privileged container. Is it possible to provide the security context field on the non-Istio container that strips away any Istio privileges in the pod?
Yes, you have to monitor it. That would mean another admission controller after the first one, and then you simply strip it. It is possible. I think you should be able to do it with a web admission controller, but I've not seen it so far. It's definitely possible, and using admission controllers is generally a good idea. And you should check if somebody wants to deploy a container with an extended security context. Yeah, definitely a good idea. Thank you.
Understood. Any other questions? I see Ulda Simir says, facet this issue with Istio trying to implement PSPs in AWS Kubernetes cluster.
It's definitely a good idea, but then you must be aware all your favorite demo charts and Helm charts and the demo applications like the standard Nginx application don't work anymore. So you have to work on your application and adapt it to the policy, which is generally a good idea, because what also is the case that the standard Helm charts are not designed for security. And this means it's okay if they fail.
Understood, cool. Christian.
But this is a lot of work.
Yeah.
It can be a lot of work depending on your application.
Yeah, so be prepared for some work, Ulda Simir. So Christian is saying, for typical use cases, would you recommend using regular Kubernetes network policies over Istio?
Yes, I definitely would recommend it, because it's not in user space. It's just, it ends up just in a few IP tables rules. And for most of the use cases is okay. The Istio use case, I try to convince customers not to use Istio. And I only had one customer with an application in healthcare who insisted of encrypting every connection, even inside the cluster. It's a valid approach just to be GDPR compliant, but this is not necessary in a normal environment. If you have we can talk about this in healthcare and might be even in finance, but normally this is not necessary. Network policies are fine. You have to implement them. You can use Calico or Cilium or something like that. And then you have normally a faster and easier protection than by Istio.
Understood. Cool. Any other questions from the audience? Feel free to drop them in the Q&A or in the chat. So I think, Thomas, will share again the link to your GitHub repository with all the notebooks in there. I think it's a lot of Jupyter notebooks, right, that you provide.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, start with the overview as recommended in the README, and then try to understand it. If it works for you, it's fine. If not, you can ask me.
Yeah, I really like that approach. I think that's something you do very well, like providing all the step-by-step explanations of how to test all of this in your own setup. So I think that's really, really great. Yeah. I love that.
The GitHub collection is for a workshop of 3 to 5 days, depending on what else you can do. And I feel quite alone in Kubernetes security at the moment, because it looks like I'm the only one telling the people, oh, the vendors did not do it as well as we expected. So please take care about this. And I'm afraid after the bad guys are done with Exchange and the Windows flaws, they will go to Kubernetes, and you should not be an easy target for them. Okay. Still connected. still somebody in that audience. Otherwise, I would go away. I'm still here. So, but I don't see Christoph anymore. So he's frozen and I reconnected. If you, I see the chat. If you have any questions, yes, you can ask me. I'm in the airport and my flight goes at 9 p.m. MTLS is an advantage. Yes, you can do it. And if it's a requirement, then Istio is fine for you. But you should also look into the other service mesh if they provide something like this. Istio is kind of heavyweight, and the approach with proxies always is adding a little bit of latency. So if this is not a problem for you, you are fine. But what I would generally say is question the use case of Istio, and it might be fine for you. But it might also be. So Istio compared to network policy, Istio might be fine, but it might be enough to use network policies. Please don't use Istio everywhere. So it's not the silver bullet for anything.
I think we have one more question from Peter. I'm not sure whether you answered this already, but the other security benefit of service meshes is the turnkey implementation of MTLS. That's what you answered?
Yeah, that's what you answered. Yeah, AppArmor profiles, SE Linux profiles, SecOps profiles, it's okay. And it should be included in the Kubernetes distribution, then it's fine. If you have to do it manually, then it's a pain in the neck. Yeah, so at the moment, I think I'm heavily using OpenShift there. It is included, and I don't know the default in Rancher, but it should be easy to use it too. If it is in place, use it.
Yeah, we'll reshare the links tomorrow in the email. No worries. Together with the link to the recording. Absolutely, we will. Good question here, how to start in DevSecOps. So where to start? And I think Ritesh, who is asking, is a DevOps automation engineer.
This is a good base, but you should be aware you cannot cover all the topics. So DevSecOps mean you add security people to the team, and you are not adding security tasks to the existing team. This is an overload. Sometimes you think, okay, that the developers also can do security, but this will overload you. You are completely busy with implementing microservices. So DevSecOps, in my opinion, means go to the security team in your company or hire security engineers and add them to the DevOps team. Like you would add any designer to an agile team. It's just another skill you need, and it's not another capability you can put as a burden on the existing team. I see a lot of overload on development teams, and it's quite hard to find a developer who is able to understand security. And developers have 100 times more code on their disks than 10 years ago. So please don't try to be a hero and die as a hero. Please add security people to your team and not security tasks to your Kanban board. This would probably fail.
And if you want to move into the security role, where would you start learning security? How would you approach that?
I would start with this DevSecOps process from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, together with the US Department of Defense. I don't like the military, but actually this is a good point to start, and they explain all the processes you need to secure Kubernetes and container environments. It's the documents that all are few hundred pages with explanations to the management. You also have to explain it to your managers because I think they normally don't think that this is necessary, but this is, you see the pictures inside, and then you see if it's good enough for the US military, it's probably good enough for your security. And but the examples are quite neutral, but effectively I'm not just a big friend of any military actions.
Understood. Yeah, we'll try to share the link also. Is there a particular Kubernetes distribution that you would recommend security-wise for typical use cases?
Typical use cases at the moment, normally this is not an advertisement and don't get money from them. So OpenShift has a quite good implementation. But if you work with OpenShift, you also find some flaws. So in OpenShift, you have good basic security, but I would question the assumption that it is perfectly secure. And unfortunately, it's quite expensive. And I hope that we see a good and secure distribution in the future. So the distributors should definitely work on that.
Okay, yeah, and then Pamir is asking for the link to the document that you just mentioned. I think we try to add this also in the debrief email. Thomas, thank you so much. I think you need to board your plane at some point in time. That was great. Thanks for making this possible despite your crazy calendar this week. I really appreciate that. And I think the audience does as well. We'll share the links tomorrow together with the recording. Yeah, thanks a lot to everybody attending. Yeah, if you have questions, you can reach out to Thomas. He's a real guy. You can talk to him.
Yeah, if you're in Hamburg next week on the container conference, then you can meet me personally. Otherwise, have fun with Kubernetes and yeah.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Have a safe flight.
Thank you. It's a little bit crazy.
But
the next week will also crazy.
Thanks for managing. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.